I'm a 24-year-old guy, and honestly, I've always felt like the black sheep in my family. Ever since I was a kid, my younger brother Tristan, he's 21, has been the golden child. My parents treat him like he can do no wrong, and the favoritism is so obvious it's almost laughable. I'm not even kidding, it's like something straight out of a TV show. Let me explain. When I turned 18, my parents started charging me $400 a month to live at home. Yep, for $100 just to stay in the same house I grew up in a room that hasn't changed since I was 12. Meanwhile, Tristan lives rent-free, eats the food I help pay for, uses the utilities I chip in on, and basically acts like he runs the place. When I finally called them out on this unfairness, they hit me with the whole our house, our rules thing, which is just their way of avoiding the real issue. The double standards don't stop there. Back in high school, I had to keep a 3.8 GPA while working weekends at a hardware store. I wasn't allowed to go to parties because I had to focus on my future. Tristan, on the other hand, barely passed his classes, never had a job, and was allowed to party every weekend because he was just being social and needing to enjoy his youth. Every time I achieved something, I'd get a lukewarm good job. But Tristan got praised for doing the bare minimum. Now, I'm working over 40 hours a week at a draining corporate job, trying to save up enough to move out and get my own place. Every time I get close to having enough saved, some family emergency pops up, and guess who's expected to chip in? I graduated college 3 years ago. I worked my butt off, balancing part-time work with a full course load, graduated with honors, and landed a job within 2 weeks of graduation. And what did I get for all that effort? A lousy congrats text and a $50 Applebee's gift card. No party, no celebration. Just, here's a gift card for some average food. Now keep paying rent. It's beyond frustrating. Last month, Tristan finally graduated college after 6 years with a 2.4 GPA. I'm pretty sure he spent most of that time perfecting his beer pong skills. He switched his major 3 times, failed a bunch of classes he had to retake, and basically treated college like one long party with the occasional essay thrown in. And how did my parents celebrate this achievement? They bought him a Tesla Model 3 Performance, not the basic one, but the $60,000 plus version with all the upgrades. Premium sound system, the whole package. I'll never forget the day they gave it to him. We were all standing in the driveway, and my dad hands Tristan this little box. Inside were the keys to this shiny white Tesla parked across the street. Tristan starts freaking out, jumping around like he just hit the jackpot, while my mom takes a million pictures for Facebook. Then my dad looks at me, sees the look on my face, and says, "Don't be jealous. Your brother deserves this after working so hard." Working hard at what? Perfecting his flip cup technique? When I brought up the fact that I graduated in 4 years with honors while working part-time and got nothing, my mom actually said, "Well, college was easier for you." Tristan really struggled. Struggled? Yeah, he struggled to wake up before noon and keep track of which girl he was dating that week. The favoritism is so obvious it's ridiculous. My whole life I felt like an afterthought in my own family. From the moment Tristan got that Tesla, it became his entire personality. I'm not exaggerating. He couldn't go 5 minutes without bringing up his whip or posting Instagram stories of the dashboard. The car wasn't just a way to get around for him. It was his whole identity. Tesla Bro was officially born, and it was as annoying as it sounds. Every night, he'd roll in at 2 a.m. from some bar and make that electric whirring noise in the driveway like a total jerk. Yeah, I know Teslas don't have engines to rev, but he'd floor the accelerator back and forth, making that loud electric sound at full volume. He'd wake up the whole neighborhood because apparently, sleep is only for people who don't have a fancy electric car that daddy bought them. The kid drove like he was trying out for the next Fast and Furious movie, zooming through neighborhoods where kids play, spinning donuts in grocery store parking lots, and filming those TikTok videos where people fake sleeping while their Tesla drives itself. Every time I suggested that maybe using public roads like his personal racetrack wasn't the smartest idea, he'd just grin and tell me to stop being such a downer. Bro. I even saw him drive drunk more than once. This wasn't just obnoxious. It was straight up dangerous for everyone around him. I offered to be his designated driver or call him an Uber, but he always refused. "The car basically drives itself, bro," he'd say. "Sure, except autopilot doesn't magically cancel out the effects of alcohol on your brain or reflexes." His friends were just as bad. They'd cram into the Tesla, 4 or 5 of them, all wasted, and go on what they called joyrides. I warned them over and over that something terrible was going to happen. I even told my parents, but everyone just told me to mind my own business. My mom actually said, and I'm quoting her here, "You're just jealous you don't have friends who want to have fun with you." Yeah, Mom. I'm totally jealous I don't have friends who might die in a fiery crash or hurt someone else. You got me. As time went on, Tristan got even more reckless. The videos got crazier, the speeds got faster. It wasn't a matter of if something would happen, but when. And somehow everyone, except me, seemed completely oblivious to what was coming. Then, sure enough, it happened. One Thursday night, I was in my room working when, around 3 a.m., I heard my parents' door slam open. There was frantic whispering in the hallway, and then my dad's car sped off. I found my mom downstairs, pale as a ghost. When I asked what was going on, she muttered something about, "Your brother had a little accident with the Tesla, and that my dad went to get him." A little accident. That's family speak for, something really bad happened, and we're already figuring out how to downplay it. Around 4:30 a.m., I heard my dad's car pull in. I looked out the front window and saw him half-dragging Tristan up the driveway. Tristan could barely walk, was missing a shoe, and had what looked like dried blood on his forehead. My dad was frantically trying to keep him quiet as Tristan slurred, "The tree came out of nowhere, man." Turns out, Golden Boy had crashed his Tesla into a tree after leaving a bar. Shocking, right? Who could have possibly seen this coming? Oh wait, I did. For weeks. But hey, what do I know? Miraculously, Tristan wasn't seriously hurt. Just a cut on his forehead and probably some bruises from the airbag. The Tesla, though, was almost totaled. The front end was smashed in, the airbags had gone off, the windshield was cracked. Basically, it was a mess. My parents helped him to his room like he was a little kid who'd stayed up too late, not a grown man who'd just committed a felony. I didn't get the full story until the next morning. Tristan had been at the Rusty Nail, drinking way too much with his equally genius friends. They all thought it was a great idea for him to drive home. One of his friends even filmed Tristan doing shots and then spinning his Tesla key, saying, "Let's see what this baby can really do." On the way home, he took a corner way too fast, lost control, jumped the curb, and slammed into some poor person's huge oak tree. My dad got there before the police showed up. From what I overheard in my mom's whispered phone call to my aunt, my dad took care of it with the homeowners. I have no idea what he promised them, but knowing my dad, it wasn't cheap. He probably handed them a check on the spot to keep quiet. The real question was how he talked them out of calling the police. The Tesla got towed to our garage, where it sat like a giant, broken reminder of Tristan's stupidity. The front was completely smashed. The hood crumpled like a piece of paper. Both airbags had gone off, leaving that weird powdery dust all over the inside. The windshield was a spiderweb of cracks, and one of the front wheels was bent at a crazy angle. It was basically a $60,000 piece of junk now. The garage door stayed shut. 2 days after the crash, my parents called a family meeting in the living room. In the history of family meetings, they're never called to share good news. No one ever says, "Hey, we're all going to Disney World." So, I walked in, already bracing myself. My parents were sitting on the couch with those serious looks people get when they're about to ask for something huge. Tristan was slumped in the armchair, scrolling through his phone like this whole thing was just a boring interruption to his TikTok time. The bruise on his face had turned a lovely shade of yellow-purple, which, honestly, was an improvement. My dad cleared his throat and gave me that fake serious look he always does when he's about to say something ridiculous but wants it to sound reasonable. He has this whole act. Straightens up, clears his throat, puts his hands together, like a bad actor getting ready for a scene. "Son," he began. "We've looked into the damage to Tristan's car." He said it like the Tesla had come down with the flu. "The insurance won't cover it because—" He hesitated, looking awkward. "Because he was driving drunk." I finished for him. My mom shot me a glare that could turn milk sour. "Don't be dramatic. He'd only had a few drinks." "Yeah, right. A few drinks that left him stumbling and slurring his words when he got home. In my mom's world, unless you're completely passed out, it's just a few drinks." My dad plowed on like I hadn't said anything. "The point is, repairs are going to cost around $18,000, and we think it's only fair that we all chip in as a family." I actually laughed, thinking it was a joke. But then I realized they were dead serious. They had the nerve, the absolute audacity, to ask me to help pay for repairs on a car I don't own, don't drive, and that got wrecked because Tristan decided to drive drunk. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "You want me to help pay for repairs on a car I don't own, don't drive, and that got wrecked because Tristan decided to drive drunk?" I repeated, just to make sure I wasn't imagining this whole conversation. "We're a family," my mom said, like that explained everything. "And you're the only one with significant savings right now." Oh, there it was. They knew I'd been saving up to move out, and they saw it as an easy way to cover their golden child's mess. My savings wasn't for my future, it was just a backup fund for Tristan's mistakes. Got it. How much are you expecting me to chip in? I asked, throwing in air quotes because we all knew chip in really meant pay for most of it. My dad at least had the decency to look a little uncomfortable. Well, your mom and I can put in about $3,000 from our emergency fund. Tristan has around $500 saved up. Of course, Tristan only had $500. He never paid rent or bills. That money was probably already spoken for, going toward weed or some overpriced clothes he didn't need. So, you want me to cover the other $14,500? I said, not even bothering to phrase it as a question. My dad nodded like he was relieved I'd caught on. We'll figure out a payment plan, maybe $1,000 a month until it's paid off. We know you've been saving up. Tristan finally looked up from his phone at this point and had the nerve to say, it's not like you need a fancy apartment anyway. You're always working. The sheer audacity of this kid could light up a small town. He wrecks his Tesla, after I warned him not to drive drunk, and now he's giving me financial advice about how I should spend my money? Money I earned working 2 jobs while paying rent to my own parents? That's when I snapped. I laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes out when something is so ridiculous you can't even be mad anymore. I'm not giving you a single cent for this, I said, looking each of them straight in the eye. Tristan crashed the car because he was driving drunk. He should be thanking his lucky stars he's not in jail right now sharing a cell with some guy named Bubba. This is his mess, not mine. My parents stared at me like I just suggested we set the house on fire. After everything we've done for you, my mom started, her voice shaking in that overly dramatic way she's mastered over the years. The guilt trip was officially underway. What have you done for me, exactly? I shot back. Made me pay rent while he lives here for free? Bought him a Tesla while I'm driving a car that's older than his driver's license? Constantly brushed off my accomplishments while acting like his bare minimum is something to celebrate? Please, tell me. What exactly have you done for me that makes me owe you $14,500 for his drunk driving? My dad's face turned that deep red it always does when someone questions him. You're going to help fix your brother's car. That's final, he said. But for once, I didn't back down. I stood up, feeling weirdly calm, and said, no, I'm not. That's my final answer. The looks on their faces were priceless. They were so used to me being the responsible one, always giving in and putting the family first, that they didn't know how to handle this new me who wasn't budging. You're just being selfish, my mom said, pulling out her go-to-guilt trip. No, I shot back. I'm being realistic. Tristan chose to drive drunk. He chose to wreck the car. He can deal with the consequences for once. I walked out of the room and headed back to mine, ignoring their calls to come back and talk this out like adults. The fact that they suddenly wanted an adult conversation now, after everything, didn't escape me. As I shut my door, I heard Tristan ask, so, does this mean my car's not getting fixed? Classic Tristan, always laser-focused on what he wants. I didn't know what they'd try next, but I knew this wasn't over. In my family, saying no doesn't end the conversation. It just means they'll come up with sneakier ways to wear you down. The next few days were awkward. My parents barely talked to me, except to ask if I'd changed my mind about their generous offer to let me pay for Tristan's mess. My answer stayed the same. No. This led to a lot of dramatic sighs, doors slamming, and my mom doing that thing where she talks about me like I'm not even there. Some people just don't get what it means to be loyal to family, she'd say loudly while I was sitting right there eating breakfast. Real subtle, Mom. A couple of times, I caught them whispering at the kitchen table, papers spread out in front of them. They'd stop talking the second I walked in, which, in my family, is never a good sign. If people go quiet when you enter a room, you can bet they're talking about you, and not in a let's throw him a surprise party kind of way. Friday night, I got home from work and found my dad on the phone with someone from the insurance company. He was using his professional voice, the one he puts on when he's trying to sound convincing. I overheard bits like comprehensive coverage and vandalism claim before he noticed me and hurried into his office to finish the call. Vandalism claim? That was a new one. Since when does drunk driving into a tree count as vandalism? Unless the tree decided to sue, I guess. It was pretty clear they were scrambling, trying to find some way to get the insurance to cover the damage. Good luck with that. Insurance companies are experts at finding reasons not to pay. But hey, not my problem. Not my mess to clean up. Saturday morning started with a loud crash. Literally. Around 7 a.m., I was jolted awake by what sounded like someone going to town on a metal trash can. I dragged myself out of bed and peeked out the window, which looks out over the driveway, but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. The noise had stopped, so I figured it was just the garbage truck being extra loud and went back to sleep. An hour later, chaos erupted. I woke up to shouting coming from the garage. I threw on some sweats and headed downstairs to find Tristan standing in the open garage, with my parents behind him, all three staring at the Tesla. The car was way worse off than before, and I'm not talking about a few extra scratches. It looked like it had been attacked by a giant with a grudge. The windshield was completely smashed, all the windows were broken, and there were huge dents in the doors and hood. The side mirrors were hanging by wires, and one of the headlights was missing. It was almost impressive how completely trashed it was. What the hell happened? I asked, totally confused. Yeah, the car was already damaged from the crash, but this was on a whole other level. Tristan turned to me, his face red with what seemed like fake anger. Like, you don't know. You did this. I actually laughed. I was asleep all night. I didn't touch your car. Then my dad held up something. My old baseball bat from high school, which I kept in my closet as a keepsake from when I used to play. Then why was this in the bushes outside? He asked, using that fake calm tone that really means he's furious. I told them I had no clue what they were talking about, but my mom interrupted me, saying, "Don't lie to us. It was about my bat, the one I'd had for years, but I hadn't used it in months. It was just sitting in the back of my closet with other old sports gear from high school that I didn't need anymore." Then my dad chimed in, sounding way too pleased with himself. "We already called the insurance company. They're sending someone to check things out on Monday. We told them someone wrecked the car out of jealousy." That's when it hit me. Tristan must have taken my bat, messed up his already trashed Tesla even more, and then left the bat there to make it look like I did it. The insurance wouldn't cover the damage from his drunk driving accident, but if they thought it was vandalism, that might work. Plus, he'd get to stick it to me for not bailing him out before. It all added up. I looked at Tristan and noticed that little smirk he was trying to hide. This wasn't just him being a brat. This was him being straight up cruel. He'd set me up, and my parents were backing him up. I stared right at Tristan and asked, "You're really going to pin this on me?" He just smirked and said, "Who do you think they'll believe? The perfect student with a bright future? Or the older brother who still lives at home and whines about everything?" My parents stood behind him, arms crossed, like they were a team, and I wasn't on it. They'd already picked their side, like they always did. It didn't matter that this was insurance fraud, a serious crime. It didn't matter that they were okay with blaming me for something I didn't do. All they cared about was protecting their favorite kid. "This is crazy, and you know it?" I said, staying weirdly calm. "I didn't touch the car. I was asleep all night." My mom rolled her eyes and said, "We heard you leave your room around 2 a.m. The neighbor's security camera probably caught you, too." That caught my attention. We didn't have any neighbors with cameras that could see our driveway or garage. They were lying, which meant they knew exactly what happened because they were in on it. Or, at the very least, they knew Tristan did it and were helping him cover it up. "Okay, let me make sure I understand this," I said, crossing my arms. "You're saying I either have to pay $14,500 to fix a car that isn't even mine, or you'll pin the vandalism on me so you can commit insurance fraud. That's what I'm dealing with here." My dad turned red and snapped, "Nobody's framing anyone. We know you did this because you're mad about the money." I didn't bother arguing. There was no point. They'd already made up their minds about what happened. I just went back to my room, shut the door, and sat on my bed, trying to figure out what to do. This wasn't just some petty family argument anymore. It had turned into something way bigger and way worse. I called my boss and asked for the day off on Monday. No way was I going to let my family handle this alone when the insurance investigator came. I needed to be there to tell my side of the story. After I hung up, it hit me hard. My parents had just shown me how far they'd go to protect Tristan. They were willing to frame me, lie to the insurance company, and probably worse. It made me wonder, what else had they covered up for him that I didn't even know about? Monday morning, the insurance investigator showed up right at 9 a.m. His name was Mac, and he looked like the kind of guy who'd seen it all. He was wearing a wrinkled button-down shirt tucked into khakis, and he had a tablet and a camera with him. My dad tried to tell me to go to work and let them handle it, but I just stared him down until he gave up. It was almost funny how quickly he backed off when I didn't just do what he said. My parents put on their best perfect family act when Mac arrived. Tristan was hanging around nearby, playing the victim and even touching the bruise on his face like it was part of some performance. Mac was polite but didn't waste any time. He went straight to the garage to check out the Tesla, taking tons of photos from every angle. He spent a long time looking at the old damage compared to the new stuff, and I started to hope he'd notice the obvious. This car had been wrecked in two totally different ways. After looking over the car, Mac asked to talk to each of us one-on-one. My parents went first, together. They were in there for about half an hour. Then it was Tristan's turn, and his interview lasted maybe 15 minutes. At one point, I heard him raising his voice, probably trying to make a scene. When it was finally my turn, I sat down across from Mac at the kitchen table, where he'd set up his laptop and some papers. He looked at me and said he needed to ask me a few questions about where I was on Friday night and early Saturday morning. I told him the truth. I was home, in bed, asleep. I'd gotten back from work around 6 p.m., made myself a sandwich, played some Xbox, and went to bed around 11. I didn't leave my room until I heard all the noise in the garage the next morning. Mac nodded, jotting things down. Then he looked me straight in the eye and asked, "Did you have anything to do with the damage to the Tesla?" I looked him right in the eye and said, "No." Then I added, "Here's something you probably didn't hear. That car was already pretty messed up before this whole vandalism thing even happened." His eyebrows shot up, finally some reaction. I laid it all out for him. The Tesla was a graduation gift to Tristan, even though he barely graduated. He'd been driving it like a maniac ever since. Speeding, drunk driving, even posting dumb TikTok videos showing off. Then I told him about the crash. Tristan had been drunk and wrapped the car around a tree about a week ago. My parents somehow managed to keep the cops out of it. "Check the airbags," I said. "They already went off in the first crash. And look at the damage, the front end is smashed from hitting the tree. The new damage? That's not from me." I also told him how my parents tried to make me pay $14,500 for repairs. And then, surprise, the vandalism happened right after I said no. Mac just wrote everything down, not really reacting. Then he asked if anyone could back up my story about being in my room all night. I told him, "Not really. I live with my parents and Tristan. But I did order a pizza around 9:30 Friday night and was playing Xbox Live with friends until about 11. They can confirm I was online." He nodded and kept writing. Then he caught me off guard by asking, "Do your neighbors have security cameras?" "Not really," I said. "The Johnsons across the street have a doorbell camera, but it only points at their porch." He jotted something down, thanked me, and said he'd talk to my family soon. When we walked back to the living room, I could feel my parents and Tristan glaring at me. They knew I hadn't followed their plan. As soon as Mac left, all hell broke loose. My parents freaked out. How could I tell the investigator the truth? My mom started crying, saying I was trying to ruin Tristan's life over one mistake. Like drunk driving and insurance fraud were no big deal. My dad got in my face, pointing his finger and yelling that I'd better call Mac back and fix this, if I knew what was good for me. Tristan just sat on the couch smirking, sure his plan would work like it always did. Because, of course, the golden child always wins, right? I went straight to my room and locked the door, ignoring their shouts for me to come back downstairs. For the next 2 days, I kept to myself, went to work, came home, locked myself in my room, and only came out when I was sure they were asleep. I ordered food delivery and avoided them completely. It felt like I was stuck in some hostile place where I didn't belong and everyone was against me. Then, on Wednesday afternoon, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Mac from State Farm Insurance. Can you meet me on Main Street at 4 p.m. today? I have a few more questions." I replied saying I'd be there and didn't tell my family a thing. After work, I headed straight to Starbucks. Mac was already there, sitting at a corner table with his laptop and a pile of papers. He waved me over and said, "I wanted to talk to you away from your family." He kept his voice low. "We've found some issues with the claim." Turns out, Mac had done his homework better than my family expected. He'd gone around the neighborhood looking for security footage and hit the jackpot. The neighbors 2 doors down had installed a new security system last month, and their camera had a wide-angle view of the street. And guess what it caught at 2:13 a.m. on Saturday? Tristan, clear as day, grabbing my baseball bat from my car trunk, where I keep my sports gear, and going to town on his already wrecked Tesla. The footage showed him smashing every window, denting the hood and doors, and even tearing off a side mirror. Max slid his tablet over to me so I could see it for myself. There was my brother in the middle of the night staging the whole thing. It was so obvious, and honestly, kind of hilarious. "I've been doing this job for 15 years, Max said. And this is one of the dumbest setups I've ever seen. He told me he'd already reported everything to his bosses at the insurance company. They were rejecting the claim and had sent the case to their fraud team. He'd also been in touch with the local police who wanted to talk to me and Tristan. The officer will be here in about 10 minutes, Max said. I wanted to give you a heads up before they reach out to your family. Given how things are, I thought you might want to talk to them alone. I thanked him, really appreciating how thorough he'd been and that he believed me. The officer showed up soon after. She was a woman in her 40s with a serious, no-nonsense attitude. She took my statement, showed me the footage again, and asked if I wanted to press charges against Tristan for trying to set me up. The DA will handle the insurance fraud charges, she explained. But when it comes to the false report and him trying to frame you, that's your decision. I sat there, thinking it over. Yes, Tristan is my brother, my own flesh and blood. But he's also the one who deliberately tried to pin a crime on me that I didn't commit. He was ready to let me take the blame for his drunk driving and the mess that followed, which could have ruined my reputation, my career, my life. I thought about all the years of favoritism, the double standards, and how I'd always been made to feel like I wasn't good enough because I wasn't Tristan. I thought about how they were willing to sacrifice me to protect him, and then I realized how exhausted I was by all of it. Yes, I told the officer. I want to press charges. No hesitation, just a clear yes. She nodded, took some notes, and asked me to come to the station later to give a formal statement. We agreed on 6 p.m. that evening. I drove home, pulling into the driveway around 5 p.m. to grab a few things before heading to the police station. To my surprise, a police car was already parked out front. Looked like Officer Rivera hadn't wasted any time. Walking into the house felt like stepping into a war zone. My mom was pacing and crying in the living room. Dad was on the phone, talking frantically about misunderstandings and family matters. Tristan was sitting on the couch, looking pale but still wearing that smug expression he always had, like he'd gotten away with something and was proud of it. When my mom saw me, she rushed over, frantic. What have you done? The police were just here. They're saying Tristan could be charged with fraud. I stayed calm and said, I didn't do anything. Tristan did this to himself when he decided to frame me for damaging his car. My dad hung up the phone and marched over, furious. This is insane. We can deal with this as a family. You need to call them right now and tell them you're dropping the charges. No, I said firmly. I'm done covering for him. I'm done being the one who takes the fall. None of you can force me to back down. What followed was exactly the kind of drama you'd expect. My mom went back and forth between crying and trying to guilt me into changing my mind. My dad alternated between threatening me and offering bribes. Suddenly, he was willing to help me with rent for a new apartment if I just made this go away. Tristan even tried apologizing, but it sounded more like, sorry I got caught, than, sorry I'm a terrible person. At 5:45, I went upstairs. I knew I wouldn't want to come back to this house after giving my statement, so I packed a duffel bag with clothes, my laptop, and some important documents. When I came back downstairs with my bag, my parents looked panicked. Where do you think you're going? My dad snapped. I'm going to the police station to give my statement, and then I'm staying with a friend for a while. My mom started crying even louder. You can't leave. We need to fix this as a family. I shook my head. We stopped being a real family a long time ago. Maybe we never were. My dad stepped in front of the door, blocking my way. If you walk out that door and go through with this, don't bother coming back. You won't be welcome here anymore. If you do this to your brother, you're choosing to tear this family apart. I looked him straight in the eye and said, No, Dad, I'm not tearing the family apart. I'm just refusing to let the family tear me apart anymore. And if you're really willing to cut me off because I won't let that happen, then I'm okay with it. I stepped around him and walked out the door. He shouted after me, something about ungrateful kids and family loyalty. But I didn't look back. I got in my car and drove to the police station. I spent about an hour giving my official statement. The officer walked me through what would happen next. Tristan was going to be charged with lying to the police, trying to commit insurance fraud, and possibly other charges tied to the DUI crash that was never properly reported. This could get complicated, she said. Family stuff usually does. Are you sure you want to move forward with this? I nodded and said, I'm sure. When I left the station, I got a text from my friend Chris. Your room's ready. I ordered food. Don't be late, bro. I called him earlier to ask if I could stay at his place for a few days, and like the great friend he is, he didn't even ask why. As I drove to his apartment, My phone started buzzing nonstop with calls and texts from my family. I turned it off and kept driving. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I felt like I was finally standing up for myself. When I got to Chris's place, he was waiting on the porch with 2 sodas in hand. He didn't press me for details right away. He just grabbed my bag and said, "Whatever's going on, we'll handle it." In that moment, it hit me. This is what real family should feel like. No guilt trips, no games, no constant competition. Just someone having your back no matter what. It was the kind of support I'd never really had at home. Edit 1. Wow. I can't believe how much attention this got overnight. Thanks so much for the awards and all the kind words. Reddit. It really means a lot. Edit 2. To everyone asking for an update. Don't worry. It's coming soon. LOL, that kinda rhymed. Update. Hey Reddit. It's been a while since I last posted, and a bunch of you have been messaging me asking for an update on the whole Tesla bro situation. So here's what's been going on. It's been 6 months since I left my parents' house with just a duffel bag and a lot more courage than I had before. Honestly, it was the best decision I've ever made. I stayed with my friend Chris for a few weeks, then got my own place. Nothing fancy, just a simple 1-bedroom apartment where I don't have to deal with anyone else's mess. Tristan's case moved pretty fast. There was so much evidence against him, security camera footage, his blood alcohol level from the night of the crash, which my parents tried to cover up, and the insurance report. He ended up pleading guilty to all the charges and got 6 months in jail, 3 years of probation, a huge fine, and lost his license for 5 years. My parents didn't get charged, but they were hit with big fines for their part in the insurance fraud. Between legal fees, fines, and still having to pay for a total Tesla, they're pretty much broke now. As for me, I got a promotion at work. It's crazy how much you can get done when you're not constantly wrapped up in family drama. I'm also taking night classes for an MBA, and life is actually going really well. Now, for the part you've all been waiting for. Last month, the texts and calls started coming in again. First from my mom, then my dad, and even Tristan using his phone time in jail. They all had the same basic message, just said in different ways. They need money. My mom went with the guilt trip. We're about to lose the house. After everything we've done for you, how can you just leave us like this? My dad tried to intimidate me. You owe this family. Step up and help us out. Tristan actually started with an apology, saying jail changed him and he sees things differently now, before asking for money for his commissary. The funniest part? Last week, my parents showed up at my apartment. I have no idea how they got my address. Probably from some family friend. There they were, standing at my door, looking pretty rough. They had this whole story ready. They're selling the house but need money to get by. Their bank accounts are frozen. My dad lost his job because of the scandal, and my mom's anxiety is through the roof. They basically begged me to help them out. I stood there and listened to the whole thing without saying a word, watching them pour out their sob story like they were putting on some kind of performance. When they finally finished, I just stared at them for a good 10 seconds before asking, "Wait, I think I missed something. Can you remind me which part of trying to pin everything on me makes you think you deserve my money?" My mom's face completely fell, like I just slapped her. My dad just stood there, totally speechless. For once, they didn't have a rehearsed response ready. The tables had turned, and they had no idea how to handle it. They weren't in their house anymore, where they called all the shots. They were at my door, and this time I was the one in control. I told them I'd think about it and then shut the door. And I did think about it. For about 5 seconds, before sending a text. The answer is no. Don't contact me again. My dad responded with threats, my mom with guilt trips, and Tristan with promises that he's changed. I blocked all of their numbers. Some people might think that's cold. Maybe it is. But after 24 years of being the one they always blamed for everything, I'm finally putting myself first. They're adults who made their own choices, just like I'm making mine now. So that's the update, Reddit. Thanks for sticking with me through all this mess. You guys are awesome. If anything else happens, I'll let you know. For now, peace out. Edit 1. For those asking why I didn't press charges against my parents too, the DA said there wasn't enough evidence to prove they knew about Tristan's plan ahead of time. Personally, I think they knew, but whatever. The financial mess they're in now is probably worse than anything the courts would have done to them anyway. Edit 2. To the handful of people messaging me saying, "But they're still your family. Come on. Just because we're related by blood doesn't mean they get a free pass to frame me for a crime. That's not what family is about. That's more like how prison gangs operate."